Anyway,
Yes.
I'm Brian Jennings, the head of adult services, New City Library. Thanks for everybody coming out. Nancy Moscowitz, adult services librarian, is with us as well. Nancy buys all of the fiction and mysteries for the library, so she's well versed in those titles. I read more nonfiction. I probably read about more than half of the books I read are nonfiction, but I like to read all genres. So we're going to talk about some of our favorite books of 2020, and then at the end we're going to talk about some of the books that are highly anticipated for 2021. So to get started, I have some of my favorite books that I'm going to talk about. Deacon King Kong by James McBride. Now, James McBride has always been one of those authors I thought, oh, I should really read James McBride. And 2020 was the year that I finally did, and I loved his stuff. First, I read Good Lord Bird because I wanted to watch the series, which with Ethan Hawke, and I always like to read the book first. So I read the book, loved it, and then I said, well, I want more. You know, I've had that before where you just loved an author, and I thought Deacon King Kong, which came out right before all of this pandemic hit us, so it may have not gotten as much play at first because everyone was worried about the pandemic, but on those end of the year lists, I think you'll see it show up. It was kind of reminded me of kind of like a noir, like a mystery detective type story, but takes place in New York in 1969. In Brooklyn, you've got the mob in there and the police, and you're in the projects, and there's drugs and a shooting and all of these elements. So it was really a great book, and I'm looking forward to maybe reading some more James McBride in 2021, although I don't think he has anything scheduled for publication.
Not that I know of.
Yeah. So that was a novel. Another genre that I really enjoy is true crime. And this book, We Keep the Dead Close by Becky Cooper, was highly anticipated, got a lot of good play. I think it came out in November. And this was the book, if you have a book that you say, I just can't put it down, I can't even go to sleep, this was that book for me. I wanted to know who did it. And I'm not going to give it away, no spoiler alert, but it was a pretty big book, but I stayed up pretty late. I couldn't put this one down until they told me who did it. This was the first book that I read during, when we were all locked away at the beginning, and I read it as an ebook, a biography of Washington. You say, well, who needs another biography of Washington, right? But this was interesting because Alexis Coe was the first woman historian to write a biography of George Washington since who knows when, it just going back and back. And so as a real historian, she went back and looked at primary sources and had a different take on it. She called some of the male historians who write about Washington the thigh men, who are always talking about Washington's thighs for whatever crazy reason. And they ended up repeating some of the same stuff over and over again and ignoring some other things, but it was also highly readable. So it wasn't one of these academic studies either. She made it very accessible. So you never forget your first. Oh, the Hard Hat Riot. I worked at Pace University for about 5 years. And a little known occurrence, kind of creepy this week to be talking about this book, but very relevant. there was a riot in Lower Manhattan just after the shooting at Kent State. And it was a riot from a lot of the hard hats. There was a lot of building in Lower Manhattan in the early 70s. And so it was really an attack by the right on, let's say, or some of these hard hats on students and protesters protesting Kent State. And this guy, David Paul Kuhn, did a lot of research, a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests and things like that. But it's seemingly an event that not a lot of people know about, but an important book. And that's on our shelves right now. Unless someone took it out, I just walked past it. This book, Mexican Gothic, is a horror novel, and I don't really read in that genre. But we've been doing these Friday afternoon, first Friday of the month things where we're talking about different books we're reading in different genres. And in preparing for one that I was working with Karen Ostertag, who buys all of the sci-fi horror, so-called speculative fiction for the library, I read this book, and there had been a lot of requests for this book. I think it was on the New York Times bestseller list, not at the top, but in there for a while. And I really enjoyed it. If anyone has ever seen Wes Anderson movie where it's kind of these hotels or ships and places that were once great but now have kind of fallen on hard times, the setting is in that vein, but then you kind of have this supernatural horror thing happening, and it's in Mexico, so it's really an interesting book. If you even if you're not into horror, you may enjoy it. And now I'm going to pass it off to Nancy. She's going to talk about some of her favorites.
Okay. The first book I want to talk about is Life of a Klansman, A Family History in White Supremacy by Edward Ball. I don't know if anyone has ever read anything by Edward Ball. He talks about race through family stories. In particular, he wrote something called Slaves in the Family. His father's side of the family owned a plantation in South Carolina. And in that book, he wanted to discover what happened to the enslaved people on the plantation. In this book, he wants to talk about his mother's side, which was a New Orleans family. And he knew that his great-great-grandfather was in the white supremacy movement during the post-Civil War New Orleans. And he wants to understand why. So he goes back to some family papers, into the archives, newspapers, to try and understand what brought him to that mindset. But it's also, in a larger sense, it's a very interesting look at the birth of the white supremacy movement and why it still goes on today. During Reconstruction, there was a lot of push to get formerly enslaved people to have an equal footing in society. And there were a great many people who pushed back on that, and that began the Ku Klux Klan movement. This book reads like a novel. He's very accessible. He writes a very interesting story, and I couldn't put it down. In fact, I started reading it again, and I had to stop myself because I've already read it once. So I would recommend it if you like narrative nonfiction. There's nothing dry about this book. It's just fascinating. Okay, next slide, please. This book, Amnesty by Aravind Adiga. This was on a lot of best books of the year. It came out in February, so I completely missed it. So I went back and read it. And this was a very poignant story about an undocumented immigrant from India who goes to school in Australia on a student visa, decides the school is basically worthless. And so he, even though he's on a student visa, he starts to lead the life of an undocumented immigrant where he does cleaning for people. He gets paid in cash, He has no benefits, no health insurance. He pays a stipend to his landlord. If he doesn't, the landlord threatens to turn him in. So he has this very marginal existence, but he's very happy because he loves being in Australia. One day he finds that one of his cleaning clients has been murdered, and he has vital information that could lead to the arrest of the perpetrator. However, he knows for sure that if he goes to the police, he's going to be deported, which is something he definitely does not want to do. He doesn't want to go back to India. So this book takes place over one day where he has this moral dilemma, and you just follow him along his thought process, and what he ultimately decides to do. I just thought this book was terrific. The author has also written White Tiger, and some other books. He's a really excellent writer. The language is beautiful. So if you want a very satisfying but poignant read, I would recommend this book. Okay, next. Snow by John Banville. This is a mystery. If anyone knows who John Banville is, he's an Irish author. He writes literary fiction, but under the name of Benjamin Black, he writes mysteries. Now, this is a very traditional mystery. It takes place in 1957. A Protestant detective is sent to this aristocratic family to investigate the murder of a local priest. So it's very much like a Golden Age mystery. It's got there's a very limited amount of suspects. There's a lot of secrets. And I really enjoyed this book. I thought that the character of the detective inspector is very vulnerable and very likable. And I don't know whether this will be a series, but I would love it if it were. But John Banville, I think they're the Jamie Quirk mysteries. It's about a pathologist in Dublin in the 50s. So that's his other mystery series. So, but this one I would highly recommend. If you like mysteries, you're going to like this one. Oh, well, this is a little change of pace. This book was The Lush Seine by Max Gross. This is kind of like a fable, although it's a mixture of realism and magical realism, and it's a fable. It's about, it has a very improbable plot. It's a tiny Jewish shtetl. The time is forgot. They have been in an isolated section of Poland. Nobody knows they're there. Everything in recent history has passed by them. They know nothing about the Holocaust, communism, the Cold War. They live a very simple existence, no plumbing, no electricity. Through a series of mishaps, the world discovers them. And then, so the 21st century world is crashing in on their 19th century existence. And it makes for a very entertaining novel, but there's a little bit of heartbreak in it. So if you like Isaac Bashevis Singer or Sholem Aleichem or Michael Chabon, you probably would like this. A very entertaining book, very funny. Okay, next. Oh, The Abstainer. The Abstainer by Ian McGuire. An abstainer is a person who abstains from alcohol. This was a historical fiction, as they said, takes place in 1867. There's a growing movement for Irish independence, and some of it now has been brought over to England. So there's a lot of unrest in Manchester, England, and this Irish constable is brought over to kind of see what he can do to help. So he has a series of informers who will tell him what's going on. And his loyalty is to the crown and is to, not to Ireland, but to do his job. And he really wants to do his job. He's an alcoholic, but he's not drinking. He's trying to get his life together. At the same time, a man is brought over from the United States. He's an Irishman who served in the Civil War. He's a professional killer. He's brought over to avenge the deaths of these three Irishmen who were hanged early in the book. And these two men, through a series of adventures, come face to face. And we see the struggle between them. It's a story that really talks about revenge, loyalty to a cause or to yourself, and sacrifice. I just love this book. I love the settings. The characters were just unforgettable. It was a very satisfying book. He also wrote Northwater, which I haven't read, but I think he's just a great author. Just really accessible literary novel. Okay, next. Okay, that's the end of my picks and Brian's picks. Now, we did ask the staff to give us some of their recommendations, the things that they liked. Susan, who works in technical sorry, it's now called support services. You probably have seen her at the circulation desk. She liked this book, Deadlock by Catherine Coulter. Catherine Coulter probably doesn't need any introduction. She writes a very long-running series starring these FBI agents, Savage and Sherlock. And she particularly liked this one a lot. The nice thing about this series is it's not getting stale. She's as good as ever, if not better. If you really like suspense, this is probably something you would like. If you haven't read her, you could start back at the beginning and you've got lots of books ahead of you to read. Okay, Mark. Mark is head of support services. He works at the circulation desk quite often. I liked his suggestion because he recommended Best American Short Stories for 2020. This is a series that's published every year. We get it every year. A lot of people don't read short stories. They're almost like a stepchild of fiction. People want to invest in a whole book. A story just seems like, well, you read a few pages and it's over. But there's a lot to be said for short stories. They can really be little jewels, and they can really be a very satisfying reading experience. The authors that are included here are all authors that write novels. So this is also a good way to discover an author whose writing style you like. And the thing about short stories, you can dip in and out. You can read one before bed. So it's a very flexible reading experience. And if you haven't read short stories, it might be time just to get back in and see how good these short stories really are. So I'm glad that Mark suggested this book. Okay. Oh, this book, The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This was suggested by Kathy Backer, who's a children's librarian. And it's a fantasy, but a lot of times people don't like genres because they say, well, I don't read that genre. But I think that can be very short-sighted because you can really get a wonderful experience reading a book that you normally wouldn't choose. And this book, I haven't read it myself, but it got wonderful reviews. And I think it's the kind of book, as Kathy said, it was charming and much needed escape from these crazy times. And I think it was considered to be a beautiful book. So I think if you're in the mood for something that will touch your heart and take you away from our daily travails, this would probably be a good choice. Okay, next. Okay, Janet. Janet is head of children's services, and this is proof she doesn't just read children's books. The Woman Before Wallace by Bryn Turnbull. She read this before it came out. It came out not too long ago. And I read this too on her recommendation. It's a story of Thelma Morgan Furness, who, when she was about to leave for America, asked her dear friend Wallace Simpson to watch out for the Prince of Wales. Well, she lived to regret that, or maybe not. But besides her relationship with the Prince of Wales, she had a very colorful life, several marriages, a lot of involvement with different famous people. And the heart of the book is the custody battle over her niece, little Gloria Vanderbilt. Thelma's twin sister, Big Gloria, had been married to Reggie Vanderbilt, who passed away. And the Vanderbilts are fighting Big Gloria for the custody of little Gloria. What I thought was interesting is that their concept of motherhood is quite different than ours. Little Gloria, even though everyone was fighting over her, was raised by servants. and people would just leave their children. Wealthy people would leave their children for months on end. And even though they were fighting so hard over Gloria, I think it probably had more to do with money than it did for their sake of little Gloria. And it's interesting to think that little Gloria Vanderbilt is Anderson Cooper's mother. So it just makes it more real, I think, somehow. But it's a very enjoyable book, very lively and well written. And if you're looking for a nice escape, I like this very much. Okay, Janet also recommended Girl in the Mirror by Rose Carlyle. This is a first novel. And this is for people who like those unreliable narrator, domestic thrillers, too good to be true. And this looks, I haven't read this one either, but it looks really interesting. There's an evil twin. It's very twisty and turny plot. So this also is a nice escape read. There's so many books that are in this genre that people just love. It just takes you away from everything. So see if you can get a hold of this one. Okay, don't know if we have anything else. Okay. Oh, Brian, you want to take this about the overdrive?
Yeah, sure. What we did is we took a look at what the top checkouts on our overdrive ebooks that we offer from the library for 2020 to kind of give you an idea of what people have been reading. The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett was the top book of the year for 2020. A 2019 book, still rated highly though, Where the Crawdads Sing. Giver of Stars was third by Jojo Moyes. Then Little Fires Everywhere.
Oh, I meant to put her last name, Celeste Ng. I left it out.
Celeste Ng, N-G.
Mm-hmm.
The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. The Silent Patient. American Dirt. Such a Fun Age. And then the last two are memoirs. Educated, I believe, was published in 2019. And then Michelle Obama's memoir. Also, recently I've been looking at the top checkouts from December of 2020, so just last month. And the top book for our Overdrive ebooks last month was President Obama's memoir, Promised Land, which I read and I thought was fantastic. And then the second most popular book was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett in December. And the third was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And that was Goodreads, which is a popular kind of social reading website by Matt Haig, H-A-I-G. That was voted their top novel of 2020, and that was the third most popular book last month. So now we're on to the second part of this, which is highly anticipated books of 2021. It's just a small sampling.
Oh, yeah. You see there's only 10 books listed, which is an infinitesimal amount. We get probably at the library between 80 and 100 new fiction titles every month. So this is nothing. But I wanted to talk about some of these books that have gotten very good pre-pub, or books that are by favorite authors or books that you might not even know are coming out because you've never heard of the author. So let's get started with the first one. Next. I'm doing this in chronological order. So the first one that I have on the list is My Year Abroad by Chang-Rae Lee. It's coming out February 2nd. If anyone has read his other books, Native Speaker, Aloft, he's considered one of our greatest novelists, contemporary novelists. It sounds like an interesting premise, a young college student, very ordinary, is taken abroad by a Chinese-American businessman who decides to mentor him. And they have a lot of adventures through Asia. And this should really, this should be a fun book for people, whimsical, shocking, and heartbreaking. So put that on your list if you like Chang Ray Lee, if you haven't read anything by him, or if you want to. This one's coming out in February. Okay, next. Okay, The Removed by Brandon Hobson. The author, Brandon Hobson, is a member of the Cherokee Nation. This book comes out on February 2nd. And I think every library, and especially our library, or just as well, we're trying to get more authentic voices in the fiction that we buy, more diverse things. We don't just want to buy the same thing over and over. This book I've heard the author speak about this book, and it sounds wonderful. Cherokee family has lost their teenage son to violence, and it's the eve of the anniversary of his death. It's also a Cherokee holiday, and they take in a foster child, and they're trying to reach some kind of peace in their lives and come to grips with the loss of their son. There's a lot of Cherokee myth in here, and I think this is going to be an outstanding book. Tommy Orange, who wrote There, loved this book. And I think to get voices from the Native American population is important. We have to hear other voices in our country, and so I'm really happy that this book is coming out, and I'm going to read this one. Okay, next. Oh, now She Needs No Help From Me, 4 Winds by Kristen Hanna, coming out February 9th. And believe me, I've ordered plenty of copies. I'll probably have to order more. I've only read 2 books by her. I have read this book in a pre-pub alert. And it was very, I'm not an expert on her, but she writes an absorbing story. This takes place, a family in Texas. They're just the Dust Bowl. They can't plant anything because the soil is so dry, it just blows around. They're all full of dust everywhere. They're so poor, they can't afford to buy shoes, and they're desperate. And they decide, like many people, to go to California. And once they go there, it's no paradise. Nobody wants them there. There's border police. They can't get decent jobs. They can only get jobs being farm workers. They're very poorly paid, and there's a start of a union organization. It's very much, I guess, like a poor man's. Well, that sounds like an oxymoron. Like a poor man's Grapes of Wrath. But the characters are really well done, and I think that when we, in our present logic, are going through a hard time, it's very helpful to look at when there's been other hard times in our history and how people got through it, and the fact that they did get through it can give us some strength. So I'm sure there are tons of Kristen Hanna fans out there. As Brian said, if we only had Kristen Hanna books in the library, we would still do very well with our circulation statistics, because every time a new book comes out of hers, we have to go out and replace all our old ones. Okay, now this book, I heard the author speak, The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. It's coming out March 2nd. It's a debut novel. It's got parallel storylines, one in the present day, one in 17th century London. Caroline in the present day finds a bottle while she's mudlarking. Mudlarking is when people go along the Thames River during low tide and they find all kind of little tchotchkes and little treasures. And it's a lot of fun. People love doing it. And she finds a bottle, and that kind of brings us into the other storyline of Nella, who was a 17th century apothecary. Now she's there really a woman's apothecary. She's a secret. She's behind a door, and she helps women, I don't know, let's get rid of or deal with the abusive men in their lives. So I think the two storylines sound really fascinating, and I think this book's going to be a big hit. She did a lot of research for it. Sounds great. Okay, next. Oh, How Beautiful We Were by Imolo Mabue. This book was supposed to come out last spring, and they shoved it back like some books were pushed back. This is coming out March 9th, and this sounds like a wonderful story, a heartbreaking story. The people in this African village who are dying from the toxic assault on their environment, they decide nobody's going to help them. They have to help themselves. And it's from the point of view of the children, and in particular one young woman. And I think this book's going to be great. I loved her first book, which was Behold the Dreamers. I think she is such a great writer. I'm really looking forward to this book. It sounds like it's going to be very sad, but also very satisfying book. Okay. Oh, Eternal by Lisa Scottolini. Again, she doesn't need any help from me. But this book, and I saw her speak about this, she writes thrillers, she writes humorous nonfiction. She's of Italian heritage, and she decided to look into the role of Italy during World War II, and she has devised this heartbreaking love triangle. It's two boys and a girl who are very good friends. And then in 1937, Mussolini decides he's going to crack down and institute anti-Semitism as the law of the land. And one of the young men is Jewish. And so it brings more pathos into this love triangle. I'm sure this is going to be a big hit. We have there's a lot of World War II fiction out there besides nonfiction, but the fiction always does well here. People love to read about it. And this is, I'm sure that this is the kind of book that people are really going to enjoy. So that's March 23rd. Okay. Good Company by Cynthia Dupree Sweeney, April 6th. If any of you, and probably most of you, have read The Nest, and it's been a while since she's written a book. It's about a marriage. There's a betrayal, which most marriages, to make it interesting, there has to be a betrayal. So that's what happens. There's a betrayal. The woman is upset. Obviously, she finds something that makes her feel like there might be something going on between her best friend and her husband. But she writes, it's not schlocky. I think she writes a good novel. As I say here, there's a 500,000 print run, which is pretty good. So I think we could expect this to be much in demand.
Yeah, I figured we had to have at least one nonfiction book on the 2021 highly anticipated books. And Nancy and I just loved his first book, or not his first book, but the last book he wrote, which was Say Nothing.
I loved it.
And I went back and read the book previous to that, which the name of it escapes me now. But in any case, Patrick Radden Keefe is probably one of the better kind of modern day muckraker, I might call him. He's always uncovering some sort of crime, and he's writing about the opioid crisis and the Sackler family. So looking forward to that one. Got one more here.
Oh, one more? Okay. I think that's mine, but I don't. Oh, The Hour of the Witch by Chris Pagelian. I love Chris Pagelian. He never writes the same book twice. They're so wide ranging. They take place over all time periods, everything, all countries. This is coming out April 20th. And it says here, it's a young Puritan woman who plots her escape, but she's also being accused of witchcraft. Now, I found something interesting about this, that the first divorce in America I forget what year it was, in the 60s, around this time. But it was a woman whose husband left her, had other children. This is based, it's not the same reasons for divorce, but divorce was unheard of, unthinkable. So it's based partly on a true story. Well, it's kind of a stepping off point to a true story. But this looks really good, very exciting book, and I'm really looking forward to reading this. And you know, his last one was The Flight Attendant, and I mean, he just is so innovative that he just comes up with new stuff all the time. So April 20th for that one. Oh, Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. We had The Namesake was, I think, a One Town One Book title. She's a great writer. She has I didn't realize it's been nearly 10 years since she's had a new one. I don't know much about the book. It sounds like it's a very much an interior story, but it's about the story of a woman over a course of a year in her life. Interestingly enough, Jhumpa Lahiri lived in Italy, and she writes now in Italian and translates her works into English. The last book she did was she edited some Italian short stories. So she was born in London, grew up in the United States, lived in Italy. Now she's back in the United States, but she's a very cosmopolitan woman, and she's a wonderful writer. So this is going to be something to look forward to also. April 27th for that one. Our books are all coming out between February through April. We might do this again for May thing. Also, if you're looking for new books, I just want to remind you that we have forthcoming favorites and see what's new on our website under the tab How Do I. So if you look under How Do I, see what's new, it's going to give you a list of things like DVDs, mysteries, different media and different types of books. So that will tell you, and I know for fiction, I post every Friday. Books usually come out on Tuesdays, so I'll post the books that are coming out the following Tuesday. And my colleagues will also post new large print, new romance. So that's a way to keep up. And forthcoming favorites, I post 6 months out. So I have up through July on there. So if you want to see what's coming out, you can certainly get a peek that way. So I guess that's about it for this.
Call this a day, and really enjoyed doing this. The first Monday of the month, we've been doing this thing where we talk about books, usually in different genres. Last month we actually did movies and video games, because the library has more than just books. And so each month we're on the first Friday at 4 o'clock. We're gonna keep trying to keep this up. And some of you asked about maybe doing this sort of thing mid-year. So maybe we'll shoot for June. Maybe the first Friday in June, we'll try to do something mid-year, what we've liked so far and what we're anticipating for the second half of the year. Sound good to you, Nancy?
Yeah, be glad to do it.
Yeah, that sounds good to me too. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Hopefully we see you soon.
Thank you.
Everybody stay safe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.